Thank you, Diana, and thank you to also to Ashley and Chris from the Department of Alumni Relations for bringing us all together today. I'm so very excited. My name is Michael Underhill, and I am a class of 2010 alumni of Northeastern University Theater Department, and I'm very excited to be with you all here today for Arts Alive, Shakespeare in the NU Normal, and a conversation about our upcoming production of As You Like It by William Shakespeare and directed and adapted by Melinda Lopez. I am so very honored to be here with our artists and guests today. And so without further ado, I will get to introducing them. So I want to start first. I'll let everyone introduce themselves. But first, I just want to introduce myself and say, again, I'm Michael Underhill, and I am a Caucasian male with light brown hair. It is of medium length on the top and short on the sides. I'd like to introduce Melinda Lopez first.
Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here. I am a newly minted professor of the practice at Northeastern. This is my second semester. Yay. And I'm the director of As You Like It. I'm a Latinx person wearing glasses with shoulder length dark hair. But, oh, well, I guess it's pretty salt and pepper, actually. And my pronouns are she, the she series.
Thank you, Melinda. I would like to next welcome Christopher Edwards.
Hello, I'm Chris Edwards. I am the artistic director of Actors Shakespeare Project here in Boston. I am putting a land acknowledgement in the chat. I am shaved, bald-headed, a beard that's sort of graying, and I'm a very, very light-skinned, mixed race, African-American. Hello, everyone.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for that land acknowledgement. I forgot to mention my pronouns are he, him, his. And I would next like to welcome Alyse Clinton.
Hello, I'm Elise Clinton. I am a fifth-year theater major and American Sign Language English interpreting major. To add to the land acknowledgement, I'm currently on the land of the Massachusetts people in Nantasket. And what else do I say? I am a white person wearing a black shirt and with black hair that is electric blue underneath. And any pronouns are fine by me. And I played Jaques and As You Like It. Got it.
Wonderful. Nice to virtually meet you, Alyse. And I would like to now welcome Ames Nobles.
Hi, I'm Ames Noble. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I play the Dukes in As You Like It. And oh geez, what else is there? I'm a fifth-year political science major. And I think that was everything.
Great. Thank you. Now, I am so excited to be here today for this conversation, and in this weird, strange time over Zoom, which I would not be able to be present here today, as I'm coming to you from Detroit, where I'm currently a student at Wayne State University. And I will apologize in advance if I do seem flustered at any point. It was simply because I am keeping up with whatever is Antonio is putting in the chat with all of my lovely former colleagues. It was so great to see you all here today. So why are we here today? We are here to discuss the upcoming production that the department is currently working on, As You Like It. And that's spelled A-S, the letter U, L-I-K-E-I-T. I made the assumption it was in honor of my last name, but I don't think that's quite it. So I want to go back to the beginning of the story with Melinda, who is directing and adapting this project. Can you just tell us about where this project came from in this strange pandemic time that we are in?
Sure. There's a lot of ways to answer that question, and I'll try to be as succinct as possible. I was very drawn to the idea of directing a comedy in a year of very difficult personal circumstances, community circumstances, the university. We've had a hard year, and So I was drawn to the idea of directing a comedy. I'm a Shakespeare nerd, and so As You Like It has been one of my favorite plays. But I also knew that I wasn't going to do a non-adapted. So, for example, so something simple was As You Like It has, I don't know, 99 characters in it. And we were limited in terms of how many people we could gather together in the theater. So I worked to cut the play to so that it was possible for 9 actors to do it. I also knew, although we were going to be rehearsing live and in person, we were not going to be experiencing as an audience. I knew we were going to be have a Zoom edit, so I cut the play to 90 minutes, which involved sacrificing some of our perhaps favorite characters. And finally, I looked hard at the things that bothered me in the play, and I did some adaptations around the heteronormative ending. We worked as a company to identify how we wanted our characters' pronouns, and specifically, I wrote some added material for Rosalind and Celia, which I actually think is the real love story in the play. So I actually just made up a whole scene for them, which is not Shakespeare, it's me. And then we tried to bring it into contemporary times, although our designers did this great kind of like quasi sort of 70s, like cool forest, national park sign. And like, there's a lot of influences from many different periods. So it's ageless, timeless Shakespeare. That's my short answer. I hope that was satisfactory.
Yes, yes. And for those of you who are in attendance, this will be available to stream starting next week, April 14th. And by registering tonight, you will all receive a link to that production when it is available to you. So thank you all for being here and getting a little sneak preview. I am curious now, we do have 2 members of the cast who have been working on this production. So I would love to hear from Alyse and Ames about from the beginning. So what was your perspective of what this production would look like before rehearsals began, when auditions happened, and over the course of rehearsals and filming, how did that perspective change? Or what was the biggest thing that surprised you about this process? Start with Ames.
All right. Yeah. A lot of what happened during the process was kind of what I was anticipating for the most part. A lot of acting with masks and having to get used to working around social distancing guidelines and that kind of thing. So a lot more like being conscious of what my impulses as an actor are and whether or not those are things that are healthy to do in the space at all. In general, it just feels weird to have finished my part in it as an actor like 2 weeks ago and to be waiting now for it to be shown to people, and also that I'll be able to watch myself performing. I usually can't do that, so this is going to be very interesting.
Yes, certainly. The idea of theater in the digital age, as it takes on a much different idea. I always thought of theater, live theater, as sort of the actors, the last line of defense. You are the one who is to physically bring that to the stage, and film becomes more of a director's, editor's game, where you don't necessarily have the choice of that last, which cut they're taking, how they're going to be putting that together, and then you get to watch it, which is, as an actor, so strange sometimes. Alyse, what about you? What was your experience of this?
Yeah, I think much like Ames, the rehearsal part went a little more how I expected it to. I think I was lucky to study some acting under Antonio, who already was keeping distance in our acting classes. So that didn't feel as weird as I think it might to people who like to act this close to another person. Simple thing that me and my roommate Sydney, who was also in the play, we talked about a lot was rehearsing with something covering your mouth realizing, oh, when we start filming, I'm going to have to remember to be expressive with the lower half of my face, because sometimes you don't even realize what faces you're making under the mask because you're thinking so much about being expressive with your eyes or your body. That was a little silly thing. But I think for me, filming was the real unknown that, I mean, part of me was a little scared the entire process that some day we were going to get the phone call that somebody got COVID and we were going to have to shut it all down. But getting there, and the runs of the play felt a little more normal because we split it in half and did one day running the show twice and then the next day doing the second half of the show twice. But those 2 days that followed, which were all inserts, which was a film term I didn't know because I've never done any film work, of just running little bits of the play at different moments, were the really interesting part for me, learning how that worked. And much as Ames said, I'm very eager to see what it ends up becoming, because it's such a different experience to, you know, what people saw because you lived it. And I know what you might see, but I don't know what's going to make it into the end, as you were saying.
As you both were mentioning this, I literally just tried to hide self-view on this panel and realized that it's not working for this particular version, that I have to stare at myself speaking right now, which is what we all love. Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for being here. Chris, you're the artistic director of Actors Shakespeare Project, but you've also had a storied career of Shakespeare across the country, both in Nevada and New York. So Actors Shakespeare Project is sort of made a name for itself in putting Shakespeare in non-traditional performance spaces, not having a home theater. And you as well, I think, throughout your career have made a tradition of approaching Shakespeare from a non-traditional lens. So why do you think Shakespeare lends itself to that kind of work in non-traditional spaces, non-traditional approaches for something that was written 400 years ago?
Well, it's a great question, Michael. I think there are several reasons. I think one, initially the plays were written to be, basically performed outside, right, in the open air. There's obviously a circle around the stage. So I think that in itself is traditional, but really non-traditional where we live today in the contemporary theater. There are not a lot of open air spaces that are walled in. You're either completely outside or completely inside for the most part. I think also Shakespeare is very, how do I say this? It can come off in the wrong way. Shakespeare is very Zen. And this is what I mean by that I don't think Shakespeare brings meaning with it, actually. I think the culture, the society, the political moment that you are in at the time that you produce it, or whatever's going on, whether it's a pandemic, you get to define the meaning, because Shakespeare, I think, is infinitely interpretable. So it doesn't necessarily bring meaning with you. If we look at a lot of Shakespeare's plays, or take the play like Merchant of Venice, which has traditionally had been problematic around anti-Semitism. Folks on the right have used that play to tout anti-Semitic beliefs, and folks on the left have used that play just in the opposite. And I think just about all of Shakespeare's plays revolve around the moment you're in, and I think that's why it's interpretable just about anywhere, and that it can fit in any space. Plus, it's hard to do, let your imaginary forces work, right? Is in one of the choral pieces from Henry V, and I think that's sort of the essence, because even with it being outdoors, there was very little set, there were very few props. The costuming was of the age. They did Julius Caesar and didn't dress in togas; they dressed in Elizabethan clothing, though the play was set in Julius Caesar's time. So it already opens itself up to be set anywhere. And so when you come into a space and you have a great idea, like, oh wow, I had to go, that's a morgue. Oh my God, Richard III would be great in this space, or Titus Andronicus, right? it just allows, I think, that to happen. He didn't write a lot of stuff in, or how do you do a scene on the Nile River? Something from Antony and Cleopatra. So your imagination really has to take over, and I think that's part of the reasons.
Yeah, and I love how you phrase that, and it almost becomes a medium of it in of itself, of whether like television, theater, and that's the lens in which you can view the current time. I just finished reading a book, Shakespeare and a Divided America by James Shapiro, that looks at 8 really interesting separate moments of time in which Shakespeare's plays were used in that for rhetoric in 2 different directions, as you said, looking at it through 2 different viewpoints. So if anyone wants to read more about those kinds of things, I highly recommend that. Also, if there's any questions from the audience, please feel free to drop it into the chat. We're going to have a designated Q&A towards the end of the panel, but we have folks collecting them, so just drop them in the chat if something comes up. So Melinda, you are a phenomenal playwright and actor in your own right, and you adapted and wrote some of the text for this play. So what was behind the changing of the name from YOU to you?
Well, stress does strange things to you. It's like, you got a deadline, give us something. No, joking. I wanted to do some things, right? Another idea I had, which I think in this production is not as fully realized as I would have liked, is that, Hamlet was written in the same year, right? Shakespeare wrote As You Like It and Hamlet in the same year. And I'm just so interested with like the melancholy prince at the beginning of the play, with Rosalind sort of lying around going, I'm so sad. And, her father's been deposed, and she's basically Hamlet. And so I was really interested in that. And there's a kind of ongoing thread where Rosalind is reading the play and Celia's like, don't read this play. This play is boring. And the play kind of circles back in the scene later that I alluded to. This thing that Chris is talking about the malleability of these texts, that they seem to invite intrusion by maniacal visionary directors, which I'm totally not. But there was another iteration where I was thinking about the girls at the court. They are girls, right? They're young women at the court, dressed in the sort of Trumpian bandaged dresses with those high heels, and like fleeing the oppressive court to go camping in Arden. And that eventually disappeared into something else. You have ideas and you get enamored of them, and then you wake up and are like, that was a terrible idea. Don't ever do that, by the way. No one should ever do that production. So I thought that the U was also an invitation to the Northeastern University audience to, we were going to be experiencing this play in a non-traditional way. As Alyse and Ames talked about, we rehearsed it in a traditional way, and the actors experienced it. We ran the play, we teched the play, they had a full run through. One of the things that I was very cognizant of was that I wanted as much as possible for people to have the experience of working in person with all of the safety protocols in place. And so yet I knew we weren't going to have a traditional audience. And so the U for me was a nod to, it was going to be a new experience for an audience, as well as for our marvelous actors, and also our incredible design and support staff. Like, one of the things you won't know, but there's no backstage crew. No one can help with the quick changes. No one can touch any props. You can't share props. So the kinds of things that would normally help a company, none of that was available to us, for good reason. But we tried to weave in the new with the old.
Yeah, and I love you phrase this idea of this forest of art and this place to run off to find your true self, this sort of magical land away from mom and dad to be able to find some independence, which all of those things, maybe far off land, away from mom and dad, find yourself. It sounds a lot like going off to college, this university experience. So I'm curious for Elise and Ames, if you found any of that recognition of your own experience in college in these characters, that as they're sort of dealing with that own search for identity as you're in your time here at Northeastern. Was that something that came up as you looked into your characters, when and how?
I can go first.
Yeah.
I think for me, Jaques wasn't actually who I made that connection to my own life with. It was actually Oliver, who, for those of you who don't know the story, lives in the court and is sent to kill his brother, Orlando. But in our production, there is definitely a very clear moment of Oliver realizing the importance of family and falling in love with Celia, and really changes as a person by the end of the play. And I definitely related to that in the sense of I came into Northeastern as a very anxious, rigid little first year. I know Antonio can attest to that. And I think that I hope that I've loosened up a little bit and I know for sure I'm an entirely different person than the person who came into Northeastern. So I've loved finding little connections like that, especially since I don't believe Jaques and Oliver ever interact in the entire play. But yeah, I'll say that.
I just want to jump in because I actually remember a very clear moment when you were working on that famous speech.
Yeah.
And you remember that? And I said to you, I was like, oh my God, you're talking about college. You're talking about seeing your life. That, I don't know. That was how I interpreted flashing before your eyes.
No, that's definitely very true. I thank you for bringing that up. I had almost forgotten about that. Yeah, I think if there was one moment for Jaques, it was that All the World's a Stage speech. And like half of it is in that's one of my stages of my life. One of my acts is now ending and I'm starting a new one. And there's an excitement and a fear wrapped up in that. But I also think there's kind of a microcosm of my life at Northeastern as a series of acts. And now I'm doing that. I guess I'm in the death one right now, which is scary, but it's okay because I'll start a new one. But certainly that I know when I got that note from Melinda, it hadn't occurred to me. And then I was like, oh yeah, that really is what I was feeling in that moment of rebirth and finality, but also a continuation and cyclical sort of thing.
Awesome. Thank you. Ames, what about you? Did your experience here at Northeastern resonate within the Forest of Arden?
I mean, ask anybody who's met me. I was a different person every year. It's a lot of the being away from like a strict home and getting a lot of like freedom to explore really resonated with me. And with my characters, because I was playing both of the Dukes and their brothers, and they're both very different. Um, like my approach to them was very much like one of them is domineering and controlling, and the other one is a lot more free. And a lot of it was like, who was I versus who do I want to be is kind of an approach I took to that, on top of a lot of other things. But yeah.
And Chris, you've directed this production and been involved with lots of Shakespeare's production. Is there anything you had sort of mentioned this a little bit earlier, but would follow up on specifically within this idea of being in a pandemic, being in isolation, being sort of separated from ourselves? Is there anything within this play or Shakespeare's works that have resonated for you specifically over the last year plus a little bit, that have kind of risen to the top as we've all been kind of moving in a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So last summer we did a series of scenes at Harvard's Arboretum. We filmed scenes from Shakespeare plays in nature. And, there's this thing about this play, and as Melinda was talking about the idea of, and you both were talking about independence. I just wanted to also add, like in numerology, the letter U represents being in relationship and finding independence in that relationship, creativity and optimism. And so, you, though you may not have had a conscious reason for picking that, like on another level, that you was speaking to you, I think, Melinda. Um, uh, so yeah, there's also just the idea of um, opening up and the scope of what the Forest of Arden brings. And for me, how like this play in the Forest of Arden has resonated is that trees are like for the globe are like lungs, and part of the problem we're having is COVID is our lungs is unhealthy lungs. So there's something about being in nature and space and being able to breathe, and how breath allows you to free up. It's really hard, as Antonio can tell you, being a voice teacher, to hold tension and breathe in at the same time, or to release breath and hold tension. So I think for me, the play resonates around the court, which is sick, and that there's some major toxicity in the court, probably maybe literal, but definitely metaphorical, and then freedom and breath in the Forest of Arden. So there's that. I think Shakespeare as a whole, I think Shakespeare has for those folks who like Shakespeare, I think poetry, people find comfort in it often. The structure of it, and I don't mean predictability in a bad way, but the predictability of something. Because right now, nothing is predictable, especially for theater folks and for people in education. Things are changing like every week. So I think there's that, and also like Shakespeare has a tendency to have ritual around it, I think, and some of that is written in the plays. Some of that has to do with the way we decide to take in the play, and I think ritual is very comforting for people. Uh, and yeah, I mean, those would be the things that resonate for me.
Yeah, I think that idea of ritual and expectation and knowing what's coming next is definitely something that I think a lot of folks can find comfort with during this time. I know that there's been a lot of studies of like folks watching shows they have already watched before because they know the ending, because that's comfortable.
Right. Like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead.
There are these studies in England around audiences coming together in a theater and breathing together. That through the process of the play, that the breath will change, heartbeats start to sync up, and I think that there's this rhythm in Shakespeare, and a lot of people say it's heartbeat, the dum rhythm. So I think that is also like part of what Shakespeare, not just Shakespeare, but theater and heightened language forms of plays have to offer us or help us through a time like this.
Yeah, and I always have approached Shakespeare and speaking the text, learning the text as you learn the rules so you know how and when to break them. And because if you do the entire show, the entire poetry by rote with just the da 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 da, you're going to put your audience to sleep. You're going to fall asleep speaking it. But it's when you hit those moments that something doesn't feel right that there's a clue to listen in, to say, why is this different? Why does this moment not feel right? What does this say for the character? And in this moment, I do truly feel like we are in this moment that we're going to look back and there's going to be a before and after of so much in our life, but specifically in theater, not only how we do theater, how accessible it is, where theater is defined, who we collaborate with, whether it's theater artists in the building, whether it's digitally or other film mediums, how we do that, but also like how we approach theater, and so much of the systemic issues that we have faced I feel like have been swept under the rug because there was never any time. We have to go to next season. We have to figure out what we're doing next. And we've been blessed with this opportunity to stop and just think about how we want to move forward with how we deal with theater, how we approach theater, how we bring this next generation forward. And so I'm really intrigued, Melinda, with what a lot of you said about this, the gender identity, the gender fluidity in this play particularly. So I'd love to hear about from those involved in the process, Melinda, Ames, Elise, how those conversations came up, what those conversations were, and sort of how that moved forward as sort of got towards a final production.
Well, there were certainly a number of initial conversations before the show was cast. And I even went into the production at one point thinking that I was actually going to have the actors playing Rosalind and Orlando reverse roles, have Oliver and Celia reverse roles, even literally to just further undo all of the gender construction that we and what is an audience, the expectations that an audience brings to seeing seeing a female-bodied actor or a cisgender man. What do we bring to that? I'm trying to unlock that. Once the play was cast and that I entered into the play already interrogating pronouns and then when the play was cast, actors had an opportunity to weigh in on how, well, maybe I should let y'all to talk about that, selecting pronouns with intention. The thing that I think was revelatory for me was, I think, and a lot of conversations with the costume designer as well as to how people were going to be adorning themselves and what choices the characters were making that fit in the world of Arden. So maybe I'll pass it on to let Alyse and Ames talk a little bit about their own process and how they came to the choices they made. I don't. Ames, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Could you just refresh my memory with what the question was?
Yeah, I think.
Yes, we're as throughout the process of rehearsal and conversations within rehearsal, how you all as a cast and a production approached the characters' genders and how they identified themselves and sort of found those identities within the process within this, again, 400-year-old play.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so I am non-binary and I'm one of a few gender queer people who were in the cast. And it was kind of, for me, I was really interested in having those conversations at the beginning. So I kind of would talk to people, would talk to Melinda and everybody else before we got like really into it, just because I feel like I'm in a different place than a lot of people. But then with it, it was kind of exploring what made these two characters that I was playing different with how they performed gender and how they what mannerisms they would adopt and what they would be trying to project. So with like Duke Frederick, the younger one who usurped his brother, he's very masculine and like wide and tough, and Duke Senior is a lot more free and wise and flowing and less concerned with projecting masculinity compared to his brother. As an example of things that I went into my thought process while I was investigating these characters.
Thank you. And Elise, what about you?
Yeah, I think I've had the privilege and luck, I think, of being able to play a bunch of characters at my time at Northeastern who are traditionally written as men. And so coming into the show, I'd been there, done that. But what was special about this show is that it was intentionally asked of us to interrogate and investigate the gender of our characters. Every other time, it had been like, oh, well, this character was written to be a man and you can choose what you want to do, but it didn't feel connected and grounded in the importance of the play. For Jaques, I mean, things were a little simpler. I don't believe in our production Jaques is ever referred to with pronouns. I imagined him as more of a he, they sort of situation because he stayed pretty masculine. He was Monsieur Melancholy and the Melancholy Fellow, but existed in my body. And I have very long hair and I have a very curvy shape, which was really fun for me. I imagined him as someone who was very comfortable in who he was and didn't really feel the need to ascribe gender labels or get upset about gender labels. It was more like, I'm Jaques. This is how I like to look. This is how I like to be referred to, and that's fine. Take it or leave it, which is very much my kind of ethos about my own personal gender. So that was really fun for me, especially juxtaposed with other characters in the play who are super grounded in gender and how they're presenting, like Rosalind, for example, who is putting on masculinity, whereas I think Jaques isn't putting anything on. He's just kind of existing.
And we brought in Dr. Helen Lewis, who she teaches queer studies at Northeastern, and she's a professor at, oh dear, is it BOCO?
Yes, BOCO.
BOCO. So Dr. Lewis was our dramaturg, and you know, she led a number of conversations with the company. We talked about how the play may have been received in Elizabethan times, how there's actually not a lot of evidence about how gender was represented on Elizabethan stages, how gender is a performance. And so taking that into the play, it revealed itself in many ways. I think the thing that I'm most happy with is that you know, Chris talked about letting the words do the work and letting the words lead. And so if a character says something about themselves, we just take it to be true and take it to be fact. But we didn't try to do a lot with disguising Rosalind's gender or turning her into something like, it's just very much Perry, and very much Perry all through the play. But what the journey seems to reveal is that, you know, what the character is discovering is something inside them that they're more comfortable manifesting, that they can have power and access to power, and that brings them joy, and that there's a moment where they have to decide, you know, am I going to tell the person I love that I've been lying to them the whole time about who I am? But it's not really rooted in the physical appearance of that actor taking that journey. I mean, yes, Rosalind puts on pants, but Rosalind is wearing pants at the beginning of the play as well. So I feel like this production undoes some of the previous notions about how this play operates, as well as, you know, Celia declaring her love for her friend, and it's not reciprocated in the way Celia wants it to be, and then Celia takes another journey and actually does discover love at first sight with another character who is also, you know, embodied by a female bodied actress playing Oliver. And so we tried not to nail things down too much, and really leave it in the words of the text and in the experience of the audience watching those characters come together. And yes, and Ilya Vidrin came in and did wonderful work with, like, talking about how what Ilya said was, when movement becomes gendered, wide front-on movement tends to be gendered towards the male, whereas slender, you know, sort of curvy tends to be gendered towards the female. And he really put it in terms of movement being gendered, and that was just a really interesting way to also get into the characters. We worked with that a lot.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a sort of distinction in the Laban movement series that that is also has traditionally been referred to as sort of a more masculine and feminine, and is now more combative and loose, generally speaking, with those.
You know, how tied up all of our all of our experiences around these issues of the binary, right? And when you, it's just, it's everywhere, and it's all through the play too. And so was it possible for us to just loosen those up a little bit? I'm sorry, I think I jumped in your way. Alyse, were you about to speak? No.
Well, it's so encouraging to hear you all had this opportunity to engage with that conversation early on in the process in a way that we all should be examining these plays and interrogating. I love the way you referred to that, Alyse. Now, I know one thing that our sort of audience will, I'm sure, be curious about is what were the physical safety measures that had to be enacted in your productions, and what were some of the challenges and maybe like discoveries from that like I would love to hear some examples of like what you had to do, and what were the challenges, and what were the sort of nice surprises. And Chris, if there's anything from the productions that you've done over the past year as well, feel free to chime in.
I know y'all had a very strict protocol. Yeah.
So masks were at all rehearsals, social distancing, was that included in the blocking as well?
Alyse, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sure. Yes, so social distancing was part of blocking, which was cool. You'll all see there's a split level to our stage where we had these 6-foot platforms, which was really fun, getting to play with height in terms of power, while also mandatorily enforcing the 6-foot rule by virtue of the set. But yeah, everything there. And the one thing that for me was the biggest shift was we had pods during rehearsal and during filming, which were that only a few of us were allowed in one room at any given time to make sure we were always distanced. And my pod for the rehearsal process was a couch in the shop, which was honestly really fun for me, because I think I'm the kind of person who can isolate myself sometimes, and I really couldn't, because if I was at rehearsal, I was in the middle of everything, because I'm sure most of you know the theater space, but the stage and the shop are one big room. But then moving into the filming, I got put in the pod with our two of our newest cast members, one of whom is a freshman and the other whom was just new to the Northeastern theater program. So I really got to know the two of them really well, whereas maybe if COVID didn't exist and we could all mix together, I could have gravitated towards the people in the cast who I knew really well. So that was a pleasant surprise by the pod nature of things.
And we, let's see, we opened the garage doors to air out the spaces, so we would periodically be freezing cold. The theater was limited, this is my cat, sorry, limited to 15 people. So we had a cast of 9, which meant that, tech was very interesting. We actually had designers who couldn't be in the theater. They had to watch on monitors because we were over our capacity. Costume, protocol was incredibly strict. As I said, no assistance with quick change, not even handing someone a scarf to put on as they were running backstage. What are some of the other things that I'm forgetting, Ames?
Just part of it being a lot of like the props and having to know who touches which props, and people not cross-contaminating, I guess, the props. Oh, no singing. That was a hard one.
Yeah.
You cannot have a group of theater people and tell them not to sing.
Yeah.
That was awful. And not getting to sing during the show was a little bit tragic. Yeah, Herbert is sharing some things in the chat just about how a lot of the actors, we had to do our own battery changes for our mics, and we had to put on the mics ourselves. And I don't mean to sound like I'm spoiled, because I've always had my mic put on me. It's that I physically putting my mic on is really hard to do because I can't see the side of my head.
Yeah.
But other than that, it was there are a lot of unique challenges to it with doing it, but a lot of them were solved through clever like set things, like with the height differences and everything, and yeah, just a lot of other little things that were kind of just done.
And I'll also add, so no kissing, obviously, which is tough in a love story. What we found was an effect that I really enjoyed was we had all the social distance, but for the last dance, all the actors had gloves, and so they were able to touch hands palm to palm and sort of do a kind of traditional dance, which was very sweet. And then anyone who knows the play, that's wrestling is the centerpiece. And boy, I had a lot of sleepless nights thinking, how do we do it? How do we do it? How do we do it? And then ultimately it was just a really easy change. Jesse Henson and we said, let's make it a staff fight. And so it's a fantastic stage combat with quarterstaffs that works beautifully. And so, there were just interesting solutions all the way through. There was a question about the set. We actually put two sets in the space. So there's the court if you're facing one way, and Arden if you're facing the other way, and lots of duplicate props, etc.
That's fantastic. Just checking in with the chat here. I love seeing that Jesse Henson loves staff fighting. I can see how giddy he could be in that rehearsal room as I sit here. There are some production photos in the chat right now for folks from Herbert Moore. Thank you for sharing that. Feel free to open those up. And I do want to open up, we have about 10 minutes left for any audience questions. I did get one from Diana, thank you. Curious for our students, if going through this process, has your opinion of Shakespeare, performing it, reading it, its existence in today's society, has that changed at all over the course of this production?
I don't know if we have time for me to get into what my initial opinion was, let alone how it has changed. I'll just say that my opinion hasn't really changed because my opinion was always this is big and foundational for a lot of reasons, but also that a lot of importance is placed on Shakespeare that I feel could be paid to a lot of like different works by people of color and things of that nature, which has always been my stance. Is just like attention's a resource. We can spread it. But yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it a lot. Speaking things that I'd heard that I knew were like big things, and knowing the context for them was really satisfying.
Amazing. Would you, Elise?
I don't know if it's so much a change just because of this production, but this is the first production I'd ever been in that changed so much of the text. Even in other productions where there was edits and cuts, this one has so much modern language thrown in. And I was raised by a very traditional Shakespearean actor who always very much rigidly pushed back against that. And I always, teenage rebellion was like, that's so stupid, mom, why are you? But I think this show is proof of how much more powerful Shakespeare can be if you stop putting him up on this pedestal that I don't want to say he doesn't deserve, because he's a wonderful writer, but he doesn't deserve necessarily as high of a pedestal as some people put him on, in terms of you can't change it, you have to be precious with it. I think this production has just been a more of a lived experience for me, being like, yeah, totally, we can kind of shove Shakespeare aside and do our own thing a little bit.
And he's been dead for about 400 years, so I don't think he'll mind. We had one question from Kate, who I believe also was class of 2010, representing tonight. So proud. Is it difficult doing a show without the live audience's energy and reactions? And what was that sort of process of sort of performing? So any reaction or response to that?
Linda, would you like to go first, or may I? All right. Yeah, I love performing. It brings me a lot of joy, and one of my favorite things about performing with people who are in a room is getting to play off of that energy. Outside of theater, I also started doing stand-up comedy, and I also perform music. So like being able to have that back and forth is really important. But without it, it feels weird. Sort of like watching a sitcom that is filmed in front of an audience, but with all the laughter cut out. I have to find all of that energy myself and kind of roll with it. And I feel awkward whether or not the actual product is, which I don't think it ended up being like that. It just feels weird to do things and not hear the reaction.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, have you ever tried telling a joke on a Zoom meeting over the past year and just silence? um, Linda, did you have any other response in addition to?
I was just going to say, I mean, there were certain jokes that I laughed at every single time, and it just got embarrassing. It was just like, come on, you know. But I honestly just, they were funny to me every time, and at some point, you just wish that someone else would be laughing with you. So, but it was much easier on me than it was on the cast.
And that's one of the questions I have about sort of moving from here in this sort of inflection point, and I think this production will live on as in our memories, and certainly with a recorded production, it will exist from here forward. What from your experiences over the past year do you all hope will change? What are the changes you hope you will see in theater, in the industry, whether it is production and live performance, or what are the things you're hoping to see change based off of your experiences of the last year?
Chris, will you take that?
Yeah, there are a lot. I just want to piggyback off of what Ames and Elise said. Specifically Shakespeare. The industry of Shakespeare has taken up a lot of space in our world. And, you know, I agree. There needs to be more room for other voices and other styles and forms. I think generally speaking, though I am not a fan of Zoom theater, I don't even know if it is theater. I think it's a whole nother debate. But setting it aside, the one thing that I do like about it is the accessibility, and that, you know, we've been able to do shows now and have people from Australia, England, Canada drop into our shows through Zoom. So I do appreciate that. I hope we can come back with grace, and I think the biggest thing for me is inclusivity around, and that just goes across so many different levels, that in the workforce, in the writers, in the producers, in where the money comes from, where how the boards respond to things. So I think for me the biggest thing is inclusivity, and then the narratives that we are putting out in the world, whose narrative is actually universal. Because I'm obviously I run a Shakespeare company, but I don't know that Shakespeare all the time is universal. And the question I keep asking myself when I run into people that say, you know, Shakespeare's universal, I go, and and they say he's a genius. I'm like, well, is he a genius, or are his plays more of a testament of our inability to change our human nature 400 years later? So, yeah.
Well, I think that's a good segue, so we can chew on that. And there's a few other questions on the chat. Tierney and Bella. Bella Tasha, is that you? I hope it is. And maybe we'll hold these questions for our next event, just because I'm mindful of the time. I just want to say that maybe for you, as for me, choosing to spend another hour on Zoom after a long day is a lot. And I really thank you on behalf of the students and the staff and the faculty of the department that you have chosen to spend this hour with us in this conversation. For those of you alums, just remember that this still is your home. right? So hopefully, Zoom makes it easy for you to jump in. Anna Westendorf, are you still in California? Rather than coming to Boston for an alumni event, but hopefully we'll be able to greet you back into the ever-changing, ever-evolving studio theater with more than 15 people on board very, very soon, once we're all vaccinated and whatnot. It is just wonderful to see so many of you older, wiser people. Do you remember the cock-up Richard III that I did a few years ago? Cross-gender casting was a disaster and a half. So things do change, things evolve. We get a little bit better and a little bit clearer. And I sincerely hope that this is how we're going to continue to evolve. Rather than coming back, we're just going to continue to evolve to the next thing. Quickly, Bella, the question that you posed, what's interesting is that we have so many students who are doing combined majors between theater and media and screen studies. And in fact, Riley Cohen, big shout out to Riley Cohen, who was the videographer and editor of the production, is one of them. So this is their time for these combinations and these interdisciplinary, oh my God, I sound like Nancy Kindelan, these interdisciplinary programs that we're attempting to create to generate the future of the art form. Michael, thank you. I kept watching you, witnessing you, and your mama was here for a hot minute, I think. It was good to see her. I hope she's still there. Just an amazing sensation of being old, remembering you in voice and speech 1,000 years ago when you could hardly open your eyelids, remember? And now you're an adult, amazing thoughts and amazing agility and articulation. It gives me great joy and great hope. And all of you, wonderful to see you. Joel Breslin, I just want to shout out to you because you are the innovative person at Northeastern. And thank you for coming. And I hope you can tell to the people that matter at this university that theater is at the height of innovation, that we are the center of innovation through the arts. So if you can get that message up to the chain of command, thank you for being here. And that's my challenge to you. And Diana, Ashley, and Chris, thank you for helping us through the alumni office to keep the network of alums alive and rich for all of these purposes. And for those of you in the panel, thank you for your time, Ames, Elise, Chris, Edwards, my brother. And this, what I decided to call Melinda Lopez, and I think it's taken on La Fabulosa, because, oh my God, are we lucky that she's here.
Indeed.
So thank you, everybody. Buenas noches, and see you soon.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. See you.
Thank you.
Care.